Today I'm talking with author Brendan O'Meara, writer of The Front Runner: The Life of Steve Prefontaine. Brendan offers a fresh, definitive retelling of Prefontaine's life, revisiting one of the most enigmatic figures in American sports with a 21st century lens. Through dozens of original interviews with family, friends, teammates, and competitors, this long overdue reappraisal of Prefontaine, the first such exhaustive treatment in almost 30 years, provides never before told stories about the unique talent, innovative mental strength, and personal struggles that shaped Prefontaine on and off the track. What inspired you to write a book about Steve Prefontaine?
Yeah, the 50th anniversary is such a big hook. It's a big moment. It's a big anniversary, of course, and it just in a way that kind of sells itself in a lot of ways. You're like, oh my God, it's been 50 years, and the only other truly definitive for the time is Tom Jordan's book, and it's a wonderful account. It's pretty slim. It first came out, I believe, in 1978, so just 3 years after his passing, without the benefit of newspapers.com and being able to search for things and curate things and digitally. The work that Tom did on that book is really, really incredible. And then it just, a lot of the other accounts that I've seen, Kenny Moore's, Bowerman and the Men of Oregon, are that his set piece on Prefontaine in there is almost a book unto itself. And so a lot of these accounts, accepting Jordan's, were kind of their personal slice and how their lives overlapped with it, be it Kenny Moore or Steve Bentz, and a few others who, be it a magazine piece or whatever, it tends to be their slice of Steve. And it was in my capacity of saving some string over the last few years, and then knowing that this big anniversary was coming, I was able to, really triangulate, his life from, close to 200 interviews and reading thousands of articles, and really taking that journalistic approach, and having the gift of decades of time allowed people to reflect and put his life in a greater perspective, and casting that that lens back 50 years, and then reflecting him forward and how he really just feels of this time, even though we've been without him for 50 years.
What do you think made Steve Prefontaine such a compelling figure, both on and off the track?
Yeah, a lot of the people I spoke to, former teammates and peers, he had you hear charisma thrown around, and he just had what Craig Blackman, who was a sprinter on the team when he was there at the U of O, University of Oregon, for U of O is how it's called kind of colloquially around here in Eugene. But he was all like, exactly, and like he had it. And Ralph Mann, who won the silver medal in the 400 meters in the 72 games, was a good friend of Steve's. And he just said the only person who had charisma on par with Steve that he had ever met in his entire life was Robert F. Kennedy, senior, from the 60s. And so you get an idea of just the personality was so big. And everyone could attest that anytime he walked into a room, he wasn't calling attention to himself in a way like, hey, everybody look at me. It was just he walked into a room and his very aura commanded that. And it's just something that was just unique to him. He didn't even have to try. And then why he still casts such a shadow on track and field, I think it's the same way Michael Jordan casts a shadow over the NBA, the way Tiger Woods will always cast a shadow over golf. It was just a confluence and a true planetary alignment of just the time of the old world amateurism starting to give over to professionalism. The International Track Association had had some of the stage. It flamed out because they couldn't sign runners in their prime, and so you're seeing as the waters being so brackish from the old world amateurism into something professional. he was right there, with Bowerman's influence, with Phil Knight's influence, Nike on the rise, and Steve being kind of that paradigmatic, rebellious figure that Nike really needed to lean on early on. The stars just aligned. He had the look, he had the moxie, shoes were changing, the culture was changing, running was changing, and he just embodied something altogether new. He was just an altogether new breed of athlete for that time. Just vocal, charismatic, leveraging the media for brand before brand was even mentioned. And like you try to capture that in a bottle every time. And I just think for running at that time, it was just a matter of timing, and he was the perfect person at the perfect time. And that's why he still figuratively and literally towers over track and field.
How does your book shed light on Steve Prefontaine's personality and approach to life?
For sure. And when you read him in print, which most people were doing, even though he was sort of must see TV, be it Wide World of Sports or just being on camera, you read him in print and he does come across as abrasive. But if you ever catch him on tape, where it was very, very few recordings of him, he almost had a very stoner cadence to the way he spoke. He was very soft spoken. He had a very soft voice, not a booming presence, and he had just an incredible way of making you feel like you were kind of the only person in the world, the way he would lock into you and engage with you. And I think that's a lot of his appeal. He got that reputation of being just brash and overconfident, and at times that was merited. Sometimes he was a total jerk and immature and just mean in ways that are in ways that he detail. But there were times where he took it a bit too far. But oftentimes he was just he was candid in a time where people weren't altogether candid, and he spoke his mind when other people were far more milquetoast and talking in coach speak, and it just wasn't in his nature to pull punches and to just to speak in those very bland terms. He was very just articulate and talking like no one else was talking at the time. The original subtitle of the book was The Dawn of the Modern Athlete, and so there was an element of him, and that was something altogether modern, from kind of cast in that mold of like a Muhammad Ali and Joe Namath, and track and field and certainly distance running. Had never seen anything quite like him.
What was the most surprising thing you learned about Steve during your research?
Yeah, one of the more surprising things was the degree to which he was like physically abused by his father, in particular as a young boy, and that came across when I was talking to, just through happenstance, Ray Arndt, who is Steve's first cousin, and he witnessed Steve just getting the crap kicked out of him, like belt lashing and all that kind of stuff, and Steve's half sister was also kind of his protector. So you kind of see like this, a lot of the toughness. Not that you can connect connect the dots solely to like the signature intensity that we associate with Steve, but there was a toughness really kind of beat into him from a very young age, and that stopped once he showed a real aptitude for running, and so because he wasn't a great student necessarily, and because he grew up also speaking a bit of German from his mother. Excuse me. Sometimes learning was hard for him. English was hard for him early on, which is what his cousin told me, and so like that was pretty kind of revelatory in a lot of ways, that that he had a pretty rough upbringing, and I don't over-index on it necessarily, but it is something that helped forge the person that we would come to know, and as he was looking to find his footing, find his sport, and find a sense of belonging in Coos Bay, where he grew up, and sport being a particularly great way to just find status and to find your place. And it took him a while, but once he locked into running, he found something that was something he could really lean into with his rigor. And yeah, other things too, like his buddy Tom Huggins, who was just a year ahead of him, um, noticed him on a particular run, like the blue course. All their courses were named um, the Libby Loop or blue course. And as a freshman, Steve was hanging around with some of some of the less savory guys on the team, smoking cigarettes like off to the side of a course, like a shortcut. And Tom was a very regimented runner, very disciplined, and he saw that Steve had some potential, and he saw him hanging out with these guys, and he was just like, after practice, he just pulled him aside. He's like, "Hey, if you hang out with them, you're never gonna realize, your full potential." He's like, "You really need to like don't hang out with those guys anymore. They're done. They're lost causes when it comes to running. But if you stay with me, I'll show you the way." And that's when like a switch went on for Steve and Tom, and they were best friends and training partners. And so that was a moment where where Tom was like, found him taking a different path that could have taken him into an entirely different direction. And I kind of pulled him back onto the right path, and the rest is history.
Were there challenges and obstacles you faced while gathering information about Steve's life?
Yeah, it's like finding the people to talk to, whether they're you hope that they're still alive. You're trafficking in a time where the youngest people I spoke to might be 70. And so there are a lot of people who had since passed. And so you're hoping that you can find these people and that their memories will be sharp, because it is, 50 since he died, and often 55, even 60 years, where some of these people, especially on the Oregon coast, overlapped with them. So a lot of those challenges was finding these people, and then if you get them on the phone, pitching them quick, because I'm a stranger with a weird phone number coming at them, and odds are they've been, in a lot of cases, some of these people have spoken about Steve over the years, and they figure there's nothing new to talk about, but then there are other people that I was able to just find who have never spoken on the record. I mean, you just find these random names, this random person in 1966 who beat him in a particular race. You're like, all right, the idea is you just call, and you find people who are like, oh, I've never spoken about this, and then they have their slice of him, and then it just does build out this like really 3D image of this guy, and he's not just this one note brashness. Then you run into people who are like, no, I'm done talking about him. I don't want to talk about him. You get other people who might demand money and stuff of that to talk, and journalistically that's a no-no, and you never do that. Compromises your reputation and the whole ethics of the trade. So you run into those kind of roadblocks. Other roadblocks are just logistical. You find phone numbers. Like I tried Facebook messages, emails, and probably 10 different phone numbers to talk to Jim Ryan, who was the world record holder of the mile. I'm sure your audience will know that. But 3:51:1, and he's kind of like this shadow character in this book and in this telling, because there's certain cautionary tales that Ryan's experience kind of laid bare for people coming behind him that Steve never quite fully followed or listened to, in a sense, because of the burnout. So far as I can tell, in my interpretation, is the burnout Ryan experienced. Definitely influenced Steve and Steve's path, but he could have probably heeded the advice laid bare by Ryan's experience. So yeah, those are just a few of the things. Also, just a logistical challenge is just I had about 14 months to research and write this thing, and it would have been nice to have about an extra year, because there's just so many newspaper articles and other archives to get into and other people to find and call. But ultimately, I think what came together is going to be, I think, a pretty definitive text, and people are going to walk away feeling like they got to the man behind the myth and really got a sense of his humanity.
Did you uncover any myths or misconceptions about Steve that you were able to clarify in your book?
Yeah, I think the probably the biggest is just this one note brashness and this overconfident bravado through which he's been painted over the years. When that first Fire on the Track documentary came out in 1995, I think, and here it is. It's a pretty much a Nike subsidized thing to really. It's a brilliant piece of content marketing if you want to get cynical about it. It's there. Nike is in the throes of Michael Jordan, and Tiger Woods is a year away from being a Nike athlete, so that they're diversified to such an extent where they are really globally dominated. And then that was a chance about 20 years after Steve died, where people were already starting to forget about him, and here was a chance for them to really harken back to their base DNA, which is distance running. And here they are, they're able to, drum up this, which is really it's a wonderful movie. And then that just, but that, as along with the feature films that would come out a couple years later in back-to-back years, it did kind of paint him as just so almost obnoxiously brash, to the point where it's like, wow, this guy just seems very almost two-dimensional and pretty flat as a character. So, but in talking to a lot of people, it was especially his cousin and his half sister Nita, and a lot of other just people who overlapped with him. You just got a sense of the life he potentially wanted to live away from the track, and how he saw himself, the self-awareness he had to leverage his personality and his celebrity to empower other athletes, to push against the power structures of the time, where he was looking outward versus just solely personally driven. And so you get a sense that he wasn't just selfish, maniacal person. He really had a sense of vision and service around his about his profile, his leverage, and his running.
How do you think Steve got lost over the years and Pre's legacy became something of a shadow casting over the American track culture?
Yeah, I think it's probably natural for that loss. It's just as the farther and farther away you get from that moment, life goes on, and it's you think you're going to remember these people forever. And Howard Bryant, who's a great biographer and sports writer for ESPN, and he wrote biographies on Hank Aaron, and more recently Ricky Henderson, the late Ricky Henderson. And while he was pitching Ricky about why he wanted to write a biography on him, he was saying, like, you'd like to think that people are going to remember you forever. You think how could they possibly not? And he's just said the stories that we remember are the ones that get repeated. And he likes to think that, like, back in the 7th century, there were a couple people just talking, and they're like, wow, there is no way that anyone is going to forget what we are experiencing right now. And we have no idea what they're talking about. And so that's kind of the idea, the fact that there was an erosion of attention around Steve. And so it wasn't until they started to stir up those leaves again and start to tell those stories again that he came back to life. A mentor of mine, Madeline Blaze, Pulitzer Prize winner, she calls biography the most brazen genre, because we're out there trying to resurrect a life. And that's what biographers do, is you find these people out there who need a greater fleshing out in the context of the time they lived and in the context of the time we're telling the story. And then we're bringing them back to life and reframing them in that capacity. And that way we keep them alive and we keep that flame burning.
What can today's everyday runners learn from Prefontaine's approach to competition and running?
Yeah, I think what was most admirable, and my gosh, Scott Daggett, who was a peer of his, a friend of his at U of O at the time, just a few years behind him, was just like one of my questions I would always ask people is just like, why does he endure? What's his enduring impact? Like, why do you? And in his phrasing, was just like, he never ran a bad race. Very rarely did he ever give up. There were a couple occasions where he just phoned it in, and he would talk about it. He's like, I don't know why I did that. And it's just, he was so burned out from the Olympics for one. And there was another instant, I'm blanking on it at the moment, but there were a couple instances where he would just like wave a guy by. He's just like, I don't have it. But you look at his performances, be it from the mile up to the 5K, up to the 10K, he he never ran a bad race. And I think he understood that people were there to see him, and he always wanted to show out for them. And he had that sense of showmanship going back to high school. And it's so that just those lessons of really never selling yourself short, and he saw and Bowerman phrased it this way. It was just like he saw that there was more to running. There was a higher standard than victory, in his opinion. And so it's trying to strive. That could be a great time. That could be a medal. That could be merely a PR, or it could just be getting across that finish line. But looking inward and realizing that running could be an expression of your own personal journey, I think is a lesson that I think a lot of people can take away. That it does the accolades and the things that get posted to social media, the things that look very glossy and airbrushed, that often seduce us and often make us feel lousy. There's something, if we look inward, there's a more philosophical approach and a more personalized journey and a way of self-realization that can happen if you just look inward and just give your best no matter what that is.
What was your biggest goal in writing this book? And do you feel you accomplished it?
Yeah, my big goal right from the start, and I think what got a lot of people uh, okay with opening up to me and talking to me very candidly about their experiences with Steve was I really wanted to take this idea of taking Pre and making him Steve again, of getting to the man behind the myth, bringing him down to earth, and not in a takedown sensationalistic way, but grounding him in his humanity. I always have this quote from Jonathan Eig, the biographer of the most recent Martin Luther King biography. I have it taped here in front of my monitor, and it was always kind of like my North Star and my compass, really, for this entire project. And he's referring to King here, and it's apropos since today is Martin Luther King Day observed. He said, we turned him being King, into a monument and a national holiday and lost sight of his humanity. So I really wanted to write a more intimate book. And so that's what I was constantly after the whole time. I read that quote constantly to anyone I was talking to, be it Ralph Mann or Frank Shorter, Steve Bentz, and other just people that never made headlines, from of that time. And so it was always trying to, get beyond that one note brashness that we were mentioning a while ago. And I think just through tracking the arc of his career, the arc of his life in that short 24 years that he had, I think this book goes that extra, pardon the running pun, but it kind of goes that extra mile to really ground him in his humanity and finding that person, and to get beyond the deification and realize that we were just dealing with a 24-year-old kid, and who was really on a rocket ship to miraculous things, and I was taken too soon. So I think over the course of this book, I think people are gonna they're gonna enjoy their time with him, learn a lot about him, and feel a bit more deeply about him than they ever did from maybe just watching race replays or the random interview clips they might come across.
Were there any parts of Steve's story that were particularly emotional or difficult for you to write about?
Yeah, it's what was always hard for me was, and I don't, my experience pales and to those who knew him deeply and personally. So I don't contend that my feelings are in any way on par, or deserve to be compared to them in any way. But anytime I would do research, like newspapers.com is like the biographer's dream, the best tool in the world, among other things. And so I would do my research chronologically. So I would say go from whatever, the 50s right through 75. And I was like, so I would read all these articles, and he was always so vibrant and so alive. And I would forget that he was going to die. Like everyone knows, and no one picking this book up is going to forget that. And so, but over the course of writing it, just the research, I would come along like, oh yeah, this is great. Like he's just coming alive in a way that was just so cool. That's what's so fun about biography and writing biography. And then I'd hit 1975. I'm like, oh my god, he's gonna die soon, and it really would be like this gut punch. And then I'd get access to maybe another archive, and I'd start at the beginning and go live and go along reading all the quotes from his coaches and McClure and Phil Persian, his old distant coach from high school, who's still alive and I was able to talk to. Not McClure. McClure passed away, but Phil Persian's still alive. He showed me like his old distance logs. Like he still had the old binders with the workouts and everything. It was really cool. Talk about bringing things to life. And then, going through year by year, certain story beats, are going to come, running against Halo Eba and the 71 AAU national championship finally at Hayward and the Olympics. And then 75 comes back. It's like, damn it, he's going to die again. And then as I was writing it and through that myriad rewrites and the myriad reading of this book cover to cover, it's just like, he feels he's so alive, he's so alive, he's so alive. And then it's like it comes and it's like, oh, it's like the carpet keeps getting ripped out from under me every single time I go there. And it really is kind of emotional. You're like, damn it, like I feel like I lost a friend again. And this is happening to me like repeatedly over the course of the research and the writing. And it is, and even my wife, who I let her read, I asked her to read a very late draft, and I didn't want to give her anything that was super rough. And she's not into running and not even a big fan of biography of this nature, but she had a similar experience. Like he just felt so alive to her, and she like kind of forgot he was going to die, and then he dies. She's like, oh man, it just rips your heart out every time, and you feel for the people who are so moved and just gutted by his death. And you just when you spend so much time with him, and I think the reader's going to have that experience too of just like, wow, he's just so vibrant. And then you're going to get to the point where like, oh, this ends and it doesn't end well, and it's you just start to feel the weight of that. And that I think that's it's just an experience that I had throughout the whole thing. That's what, in terms of emotions, it does get heavy in places like that. And talking to a lot of people too, like there's certain people who talking that you can tell they're starting to cry on the other end of the phone. Here's this someone who impacted their life 50 years ago, and God, they miss them like hell to this day.
How has your perspective on Steve evolved since starting this project?
Yeah, I think it really goes to that humanization. I came to this like a lot of people do, like, oh, what more could possibly know about this guy? And wasn't he just a work hard, play hard, arrogant guy? And so that was kind of what I came into knowing. I'm like, you always have a hunch knowing that there's more to a person than the media construct or the story they tell themselves or the story they project of themselves to the public. And I came across knowing that he was just a very self-aware person who was very selfishly driven, as most high-level athletes are early on. And then he saw how his running could empower not just himself and chart a new path for himself, but it was charting a new path for his peers. And if they could organize and push back against the AAU, which was proving to be just an anemic dictatorial organization, and they were finally getting the power back, and he was really starting to empower. The athletes are starting to learn how much more power that they actually had, and they needed a figurehead, and they finally had one in him and his organization of the Finn Tour, that Northwest tour of very small boutique track meets that he organized outside of the purview of the AAU. It was starting to show a new way for these athletes that they could maybe run and compete to their mid into their late 20s and maybe go through 1, 2, 3 Olympic cycles. And the AAU categorically almost made that impossible due to the draconian rules of the day, where they couldn't even coach to make money, that was seen as a way to leveraging their athletic profile for personal gain, and it was just a nonsense, total nonsense. But they were just all about power, and there was always new athletes coming up the pipeline. So it was just like, screw you guys, go when you're done, when you're out of college, by all means try to. A lot of these guys became teachers, so because they would teach during the day, they run in the morning, teach, then work out at night. Like George Young, the great Olympian, he was a school administrator, teacher, educator, and he amazingly somehow went through 4 Olympic cycles, which is incredible unto itself. But you get a sense of just you get the one note brashness as they kind of keep bringing that, but then you realize there is he saw himself as as this avatar of empowerment, and it wasn't just for himself; it was for others, and he was turning his gaze outward to better the entire community.
It's so interesting. It's almost like Steve Prefontaine, he knew what name, image, and likeness meant in championing athletes' rights.
Oh, for sure. And yeah, to that point, I came across a great letter in the U of O archives and their special collections where that Bowerman wrote to Knight, where Steve had finally won a race. He ran in Nike spikes, and they had apparently taken photographs of Steve. Jeff Johnson was always taking pictures of Steve, and apparently they used it for promotional materials in Europe. And it got to Bowerman got wind of this, and he excoriated Phil Knight for invading Steve's privacy, but also threatening his amateur status with the NCAA because he was still in school, but also the AAU. And Bowerman's like, I'm going to have to write them a letter, coming clean that he had nothing to do with this, but this is something that threatened him. And you talk about name, image, likeness, like his likeness was being exploited for this upstart shoe company, over in Europe where they could get away with it. But if AAU had gotten wind of it there in 1973, Steve might have been just, no longer an amateur, couldn't consider the Montreal games in 76, which it never happened. But, seeing that, you realize how far it's come and how, the athletes now can get their due. People are making, millions and billions off of them for what's essentially, scholarship. Scholarship's not nothing, but it's also pennies compared to what's being made off of them. And so you figure like that was even happening with, Steve 50 years ago, 52, if you're going back to 73 when he was like kind of being exploited at that point. So you feel the echo of those things, cast all the way back. Then you saw it then, and it feels all the more prescient now.
How did you develop the necessary scars and calluses that it takes to write a book such as this?
Yeah, I was thinking of how, the sort of the marathoning metaphor of perseverance in writing and journalism and biography. And the thing that is actually encouraging about, being a writer and being a researcher and biographer is, kind of if you're able to stay in the game, the longer you stay in the game and persevere, really the stronger you get because you're getting more skills, you get more repetitions. Unlike if you're actually running a marathon, ultra marathons, you're dying by the end. You're so broken down and battered. Which isn't to say that doesn't happen with writing a book either. You get broken down and battered through the sheer repetition and of the whole process. But it is something that you can really, you kind of get better at with more and more repetition, the more you can stay in the game. So yeah, those calluses are real, dealing with, a lot of rejection and dealing with, having to sometimes take on, menial day jobs to help subsidize the enterprise and keep going because you love telling stories of this nature and writing biographies and reading like an American Prometheus about Oppenheimer and just how they do that. That was like a big inspiration for me. Howard Bryant's biographies, David Marinus's biographies, Jeff Pearlman's, Ian O'Connor's, Madeline Blaze, all these people, and now you get to you start to see this community of biographers, the community of writers of narrative nonfiction, and you get to say you're a peer. And so, yeah, and you all have your battle wounds and your scars. Callousing is a great way of putting it. And through the podcast that I've long hosted, the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, I talk about this with writers a lot, of just the grind of it and having the mental fortitude to stay with it and knowing that you're not alone and having those feelings. Even the masters, be it a Laura Hillenbrand or David Grant or Patrick Radden Keefe or Susan Orlean, they're all dealing with the same insecurity. And it's nice to know that you're not alone in that regard, and that we all have these battle scars, and those are just a sign of our capacity and our willingness to stay in it as long as we can. And hopefully, you stay in it long enough, lightning can strike. And with the front runner, for me at least in this moment, lightning is struck.
Do you see any parallels between your own life or experiences and Steve's story?
I was a pretty driven athlete myself. Like I was a baseball player primarily. I'm built like SpongeBob. I have like a very like blocky torso, and I was a middle infielder. I was a pretty good shortstop for a time, and should have been a catcher. I'd done quite a bit of catcher. I'm built more like a catcher. That's neither here nor there. That was a strategic error on my part. I should have pivoted, but anyway, I was good. I was just good enough where my delusion of wanting to play in the majors was not totally unfounded. Like if I just kept progressing, I might have been like one of those 62nd round draft picks and then probably run out of rookie ball or something so I was good but not great. But there was a time in my life where I was just maniacally driven in that regard. And if I can say that there's any similarities between me and Steve Prefontaine, it was having an aptitude for a sport and then having almost maniacal drive to be great at it. And I never got as great as Steve was in his sport, but there were those elements of that drive. And also the burnout. Steve experienced tremendous burnout, and that's ultimately what drove me out of the sport was burnout. And when I was finally cut from my college team, I could have transferred and kept playing, but by that time I had lost the love of it, and I was just fried, couldn't do it anymore. And kind of a regret to this day. I probably wish I kept going because I invested so much time in it. Steve never experienced the total burnout of actually quitting. He flirted with quitting at one point. He gave voice to it. Never actually did it, but you get it. The fact that he even articulated it meant that it was like, wow, he's experiencing some serious burnout with all that, with the training of the day. There was very little by way of lightness of load, even though Bowerman was kind of a hard, easy guy, and that was pretty revolutionary at the time. They still trained awful hard. And just the way the seasons were structured and how hard Steve ran whenever he ran, he never mailed it in. So come summer, come mid to late summer, his tires were pretty bald, and he was often like contemplating his place in the sport and whether he should just give up or not. So, but yeah. The only similarities I see is like at one point, I had a pretty singular focus, and even to this day, I'm always attracted. I often asked writers like what kind of subjects they're drawn to, and I tend to be drawn to people of like singular maniacal drive because I wish I had more of that in me. I kind of had it at one point, but I wish I had more of that just dog on a bone kind of focus, and I admire that so much in athletes, in certain athletes, and so I see that, and that's a part of the appeal of writing about him was just seeing that focus in action.
If you could ask Steve one question, what would it be?
Yeah, I think what I would like to ask him was, where do you see, how do you see your life post track and field? What's your vision he was starting to cast his gaze beyond the 76 games and, be it opening a bar or, maybe he's going to, I would love to see just how he saw himself in the sport, what kind of life he saw for himself after being so devoutly committed to running. Because I think a lot of the things he was putting into play in 1975 was a way for him to leverage the heft of his personality and his celebrity into something sustainable after running, once his body could no longer take that pounding. So I'd love to just see really hear him articulate the vision he had for the rest of his life for the next 50 years, so we could be talking about him or talking to him today and seeing the structure at Hayward Field and how he had once organized, a troop of Finnish athletes to come here and run in all these little tiny meets on really crappy high school tracks. And then to see, in 2022 or whenever it ended up happening, of the World Championships coming to Eugene, which is seeing the world descend on Eugene, be it the pre-classic or World Championships in the Diamond League. Like, I think he would look at that and be like, that was kind of like, that was my vision, 50 years ago, and it finally came to pass. So I'd love to see what how he envisioned his life.
Do you think we're in a renaissance of distance running right now?
I love I so love watching Jakob Ingebrigtsen run because he's very much like Prefontaine. Like the way he ran the 1500 meters in the Olympics this year, I'm like, this is how Pre would run this race, and he's just I'm going to take it to you, and good luck catching me. And he did get caught, but that fearlessness and the versatility he runs with is very much like Pre. Like Pre just he was so good from a mile to 10K. Like I don't know anyone else who has that degree of range who is so good from that range of distances. I'm sure there have been runners since, but you see Ingebrigtsen and the way he's able to run is like, oh, that's a lot like what Prefontaine used to run like. And he kind of has the personality too, but he also has the world records and the hardware to back it up that Steve never quite got. He was so close to the 10K world record, and that wasn't even his race. He was knocking on that. He was like 5 seconds away from Ron Clark's record, and he wasn't even going for it. It was so weird. Like it was a race where it was at Hayward Field, one of the Twilight meets, and he was going for American records in the 10K and the 6 mile in the same race. So I guess that was a thing you could do. You could just keep running and keep the clock going and hit the 10K mark even after you won the 6 mile, and like that time would count. So had he just gone for the 6 mile or the 10K, whatever he was going for, he would have started his kick sooner, and he would have probably easily secured a world record. He just wasn't going for that one. He was going for 2 American records in one race. If he had gone for a world record, I think he would have easily got it. If that was his focus. It's crazy. Yeah.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much for our chat today. What a gift and work of art your book is to the running community.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. And what a gift it was for you to just put things up there on YouTube for like we said earlier, for weirdos like us to go to watch it and relive it and be like, wow, that was pretty special to see that. And for me as a journalist and a reporter, you triangulate from all these sources, and sometimes it's YouTube or finding some person on Facebook and all this, and you just try to excavate everything that's available to you. And however you found that tape and put it up there and curated it for everyone and putting up the splits and everything, it's just what a great tool it was for me, and it helped realize one of the great set pieces of the book. So just thank you for the work you're doing, and this is awesome.